I'd like to start with initial thoughts from our speakers, if everyone will allow that. Shawn, maybe we'll kick things off with you. I believe you've got some ideas on contracts and better CDMO relationships on your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to talk with folks a bit about really kind of the upfront optimization of the CMO relationship, and you know, the types of conversations that should be happening, hopefully between the CMO and the client to lay that groundwork and frankly select the right CMO. So a little bit of a mix.
Okay, very good. Anything before I move on to Jana, anything further on those two subjects? We can go into it a little deeper here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be talking about the emphasis of having the transparent discussions up front, really exploring the types of things that clients and CMOs can work on together as they're mapping out, even at the proposal stage before the selection is finished, to you know, make certain, number one, the client selecting the right CMO to do the work, but also give both parties a chance to really understand client needs and what the CMO can provide there.
All right. And Shawn, you mentioned to me when we spoke previously about the idea that in your previous experience, you know, there were contracts and relationships you had with CDMOs, and now when you look back and some new things that you've been trying, you realize that there was much more that could have been done. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah. Sorry, Louis. Really, we've started to use contractual term sheets pretty heavily just in the RFP process as a good way to have very concrete discussions with CMOs. As I'll mention when I talk a little bit later, the risk there, of course, is that you get into some very positional discussions, and it can inhibit a bit, you know, the free flow of ideas as you're trying to design kind of the best type of work to do with the CMO. But I do like definitely using contractual terms as a mechanism to have very concrete discussions. It definitely raises these, frankly, some difficult topics to address, but they're going to have to get addressed anyways when you put the contract in place. So why not have them up front while you're working with the CMO to refine the proposal?
Okay, very good. So basically what you're saying, Shawn, is make better use of the actual legal or otherwise contract and not have that as something separate from the relationship building, so to speak. So does that mean bringing more folks into working on the contract, or better defined terms, or you know, how does that play out?
Yeah. So, you know, when I'm working on a contract, or even frankly on the term sheet heading into a supplier selection, usually I cast a wide net. I mean, one group that I think sometimes does not get included as closely as they should, especially in supplier selection, is quality. I mean, I know we all say that the quality is involved with essentially signing off on the supplier, but realistically, there's a lot of aspects of a given supplier that may be more or less appealing to quality. Something that comes up very regularly is the batch documentation ultimately provided translated into English if you're using an overseas supplier. You know, things like this can have a significant impact on the turnaround time for just releasing a batch and the internal resources to do so. So I think it's important to have you know, functions like quality, finance, if you're in a bigger organization, tax, and many others involved in the upfront discussions around assembling a term sheet and then ultimately negotiating the contract. But if you can capture these concepts in the term sheet initially, you're putting everything on the table so the CMO can see your expectations. You'll hear their expectations because they should be pushing back on those aspects that they don't like. And then you can refine that to something that ultimately helps you understand what each CMO, because every CMO is different, is really offering your company, and then trying to optimize each one of those until you find what's the best CMO for the given project that what you're proposing to work on.
Okay, very good, very good. So this offers a bit of a different process to the CDMOs. What have their reactions been when you kind of talk them through this process a little bit differently?
Well, I mean, it's range of reactions. Some embrace it and dive right in and do a classic red line of the term sheet, and then that basically launches some very valuable conversations. Others honestly will ignore the term sheet entirely and trying to provide a proposal directly without providing any response to the term sheet at all. And then we have to have the conversation and say this is actually a very critical element of our selection process. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's been the determining aspect of the selection process, because you can really do a pretty careful financial analysis around the results of that term sheet negotiation to define kind of the risk envelope of each CMO. So ultimately, we work with the CMOs on these term sheets, and for the ones that are reluctant to engage in that conversation because they feel it's pre-negotiating the contract, we emphasize to them that that's part of our process. And eventually, we do have the conversations we need to have. It's just maybe a little different than what they're seeing from every client. I'm sure every company approaches CMOs in a different way, and it's probably a challenge to navigate the various approaches that they have to face from us.
Okay, that's very good. I think for the listening audience, and we can come and double back to this, but it's very interesting that when we talk about future relationships, obviously, contracts, financial terms, those term sheets, etc., are not going to go away. And I think what you're saying, Shawn, is the future is a better use of all of the documents that we need to put together to then form these higher, more partnership and relationships that we're all looking for. Yes, go ahead, Shawn, and then we'll hand it over to Mark after that, please.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief here. I mean,
no, take your time. Take your time.
No, it's I just wanted to, when looking at the future, I think my time working in a smaller company really modified my thinking. I've always thought about financial risk when making decisions, but somehow financial risk feels very different when you're not bringing in revenue to speak of, and when you have a fairly limited amount of cash on hand. The problem is that tends to drive, I think, a mentality that I think is very common, at least on the client side of the relationship, especially with regard to more procurement-driven selection processes where price becomes like a preeminent metric that everybody's looking at. And it's tough. I mean, if you're in a pharma company and you have option of selecting two CMOs, one costs, or CDMOs, and one costs significantly more than the other, and you can't articulate an additional benefit that you're getting for that price, I mean, no one's going to really support, especially anything going past the original budget. But I think this is when I was talking about trying to optimize, trying to understand the needs of the relationship. That's what I was really driving at, is just to give a few examples. And this is where the contract terms come in. Talking about your forecasting and cancellation terms, from a big pharma perspective, especially if you're looking at a commercial product with a kind of clear, maybe not stable demand, but at least predictable demand, you might be able to sign up for minimum order quantities in a year or take or pay relationships to really get the price optimized, and that balances risk very effectively between the CMO and the pharma company. But when you're working in a very small company with limited cash on hand, and really key decision points and data coming at a later time, you're putting yourself at tremendous risk to sign up for any term like this, because really you've now taken a contract where you may only be buying a single batch before you find out your clinical data, whether you've even got a product or not, and expanding it into this, 20, depending on what you're manufacturing, but 20 to $50 million contract, when you may only be talking about a $20 million tech transfer. So, I mean, I think these are the areas where the CDMOs and the especially the smaller pharma companies and biopharma companies can have some very meaningful discussions, because we've rejected some CMOs based purely on the amount of financial risk we would be taking on, even though their price was far, far superior to the CMO we ultimately selected, because the CMO that we selected had the best cancellation terms. So when you calculated out the financial risk we were taking in the decision-making process, we're much better off going with the more expensive CMO that had better terms that allowed us to manage our risk more appropriately. So, I mean, I've got more I can discuss, but I think that's the main point I wanted to get across, was having a conversation around optimizing your risk, especially financial risk in this case, is a healthy way of getting past the let's just look for the cheapest price approach to selecting a supplier.
Very good. Very, very, very good, Shawn. And it's amazing we got through 54 minutes without really talking much about price and the importance of it. And in this case, you might even say that sometimes more expensive is less expensive, and a lot of U.S.-based CDMOs for sure have been saying that for a while.